Welcome. We are glad that you are here. This training is on understanding workplace campus violence prevention in your role. This is a recorded presentation. We will be offering live and interactive sessions in the future. If you're interested in attending a live training, please be on the lookout for future sessions in Reporter. As we get started, we would like you to know that this information, this stuff, are things that you already know. And our hopes for this training is that it will make you aware of the tools that you already have and how you can draw on them when it comes to preventing violence. At NC State, we take safety very seriously. We have the regulation 04.05.02, the Campus Workplace Violence Prevention and Management Regulation that was first developed in 2008, revised in 2017, and most recently again revised in 2021. The regulation defines what violent behavior is, reporting responsibilities for employees and students, training requirements, information on the behavior assessment team, information related to possible consequences of violating the regulation. So sit back and think about workplace violence for a moment. How much thought have you actually given to how you would respond in a violent situation? What we most commonly hear is that most individuals have given maybe not a whole lot of thought, but some thought. However, violence in the workplace can happen at any place at any time. So it is important that we think about it, have some ongoing discussion, and know your role in prevention. So today's goal is to facilitate an ongoing discussion that should be continued after this presentation. A lot of what is going to be discussed in this presentation is not comfortable, but it is important. This information is not intended to make you hypervigilant and paranoid, but really to give you the tools to draw on should you need to, and to keep you in a relaxed state of alertness. So let's start out by talking about some categories of workplace violence. Our first type, the criminal category, this is where there is no relationship that exists between the perpetrator, the victim, and the organization. So some examples of this would be robberies and acts of terrorism. This accounts for the majority of workplace homicides. You most commonly see this category in convenience stores, taxi services, and other retail establishments. Our second type is client customer. So this is where there are incidents in which a legitimate business relationship existed or currently exists between the perpetrator and the organization. So organizations that have customers, clients, patients, students, and other recipients of services. Healthcare providers, prisons, and schools are most commonly facing this type of violence. Our third category involves employees, current or former. This is where there are incidents in which the perpetrator had or currently has some form of employment relationship with the organization. So perpetrators include employees, former employees, independent contractors, and temporary agency workers. The fourth category, current or former intimate partners. And this is where there are incidents in which the perpetrator is a current or former intimate partner of an employee. So that could be a current and former spouse, current or former domestic partner, family members, and those who currently or have been involved in a dating relationship with an employee. So let's touch on this model. This is the Pathway to Violence model. It was developed by Fred Calhoun and Steve Weston and came out of the work of the Secret Service. Out of that work that the Secret Service did, Calhoun and Weston put the stages on the pathway. The pathway always typically begins with a personal grievance, of which there are 4 elements. The 4 elements include loss, and that can be of love or work, humiliation, anger, and blame. 80% of targeted violence cases start out with this. Some people move to the second stage where they begin to think that violence is the only solution to their problem. They then may intend to engage in violence, and then if they mobilize, they begin to research and plan. As they move into the pre-attack preparation, they become more specific in their planning, such as times and dates. At the probing stage, they probe security to see if they'll be successful, and then they move into the final act of the attack. An individual can go up, back down, not proceed any further along the pathway. Very few people move along the pathways we get changes in behavior. Incidents of mass targeted violence are rare, but they are salient. So let's break down violent behavior a little bit more. The Occupational Health and Safety Administration defines workplace violence as any act or threat of physical violence, harassment, intimidation, or other threatening disruptive behavior that occurs at the work site. It ranges from threats and verbal abuse to physical assaults and even homicide. It can affect and involve employees, clients, customers, and visitors. It's also estimated that about 25% of workplace violence goes underreported. In this slide, you see what we have defined as violent behavior within our regulation. Starting with aggressive acts, these are acts that do not rise to the level of a physical attack, but that a reasonable person would interpret as being a threat to personal safety. So we're thinking about physical intimidation, throwing objects, pounding fists on desks. It may also include behaviors that may indicate that someone may act out aggressively. So infatuation with violence and statements of threats towards others. Interpersonal violence is abusive behavior between people who have an ongoing or prior intimate or familial relationship. This includes individuals who are or have been married, living together, or dating. Intimidation is engaging in actions, including through electronic means, that a reasonable person would find to frighten, coerce, induce duress, or control another individual physically, mentally, or emotionally. Physical attacks are unwanted physical contact that inflicts harm on another, either with or without a weapon. So this could include hitting, kicking, pushing, shoving, biting, fighting, etc. Property damage is intentional damage to property, including property owned by NC State or its employees, students, visitors, or vendors. Stalking unwanted pursuit. This is engaging in a course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to either fear for their own safety or the safety of others, or suffer substantial emotional distress. So examples, certainly this is not all inclusive, could be communicating with someone, and that could be in person, by phone, or by computer, following or lying in wait, monitoring activities, sending unwanted gifts to the home or workplace, threatening harm, accessing personal information through confidential workplace files, cyberstalking behaviors. And this can include gathering information via the internet with spyware, etc., tracking using GPS or cameras, sending unwanted online messages or images. Threats are expressions of intent to cause physical or mental harm to a person or to cause damage to the property of others or the university. Any threat is presumed to constitute a statement of intent and should be taken seriously. Protective restraining order. This is a legal order that is issued by a state court which requires a person to stop engaging in certain conduct. Any student or employee having an active restraining or protective order that covers the campus workplace shall notify and provide a copy of such order to university police. Weapons are those items included and defined in North Carolina General Statute. Should you have any questions about what weapons or items are allowed on campus, please reach out to university police. Okay, so take a moment to think about this question. Do people just snap? Or are there warning signs? The first thing that a lot of people like to think when an incident of violence occurs is that the person just snapped. However, we know that that is not the case. Research has shown that with targeted violence, the individual has planned and coordinated their behavior. Oftentimes, they have shown what we call leakage behavior, or a change in their pattern of behavior. The vast majority of cases, someone knew or observed a concerning behavior. And so we press upon the fact that safety is everyone's responsibility. We're next going to talk about risk factors and warning signs. Dr. Reed Malloy, an expert that's well known in the field of threat assessment, helps illustrate risk factors and warning signs with a great example of using heart attack as that example. When you think about a heart attack, there are certain risk factors for that. For example, it could be someone who has a history of high blood pressure. Age may be a risk factor, family history, tobacco use. When we think about the example of a heart attack and warning signs could be chest pains, dizziness, shortness of breath, cold sweats. Again, these may be things that indicate a heart attack is possible, but may not mean that that is what's going to happen. It is impossible to predict if or when a workplace violence incident may occur, but there are some more early warning signs that a person may commit an act of workplace violence. So we're now going to talk about identifying factors, maybe some of those risk factors. These examples that are in the next few slides are based on case studies from the FBI. They're not a catch-all. Starting with this slide, problem employee. So someone who is not productive, has high absenteeism, maybe argumentative, doesn't take critiques well. They have a history of violent behavior. And when we're looking at history, the best indicator of future behaviors is a history of past behavior. And we take that into consideration when looking at violent behaviors and risk factors. Possible substance abuse. The three substances that often correlate with violent behavior include alcohol, meth, and cocaine. So we're thinking about substances that can cause a loss of impulse control, or maybe some hyperarousal and feelings of paranoia. Interest in past acts of violence in the workplace, obsession with guns, gun magazines, increased talk about weapons or violent crimes. Other factors, they make open or veiled threats. So let's break threats down a little further. An open or direct threat is a direct statement that indicates intention. So an example of this might be, I'm going to kill you. Whereas an indirect or veiled threat leaves some room for question. There's some ambiguity around it. You don't know exactly what it is that they're meaning. So an example would be, I'm going to make sure that you get what you deserve. Well, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean that they are threatening harm? That what you deserve is harm? Or could it potentially mean litigation? And then a conditional threat. So this is where there's a threat based on a condition. If he fires me, I will kill him. That would be an example of a conditional threat. Other factors, obsessed with their job, they're a loner or paranoid, having difficulty coping with criticism. Maybe they're having a difficult time letting things go and they're holding a grudge, or they're unwilling to accept responsibility and transfer blame to others. So next, we're going to talk about concerning behaviors. These might be some of those warning signs. One thing that we're looking at, or that might stand out, is a behavior or an individual who displays noticeable changes in behaviors. I think it's important to acknowledge that just because they display any of these behaviors that we're going to go through within the next few slides does not mean necessarily that they're going to engage in an act of violence, but it may mean that they are in distress or that something else is going on. And so sharing these concerns, and we'll talk about that lots more times, is important. So starting with this list, someone who looks like they haven't showered in a few days, they're disheveled, Maybe there's significant changes in weight, whether it's significant weight loss or even sometimes weight increase. Change in quality of work, decreased or inconsistent job performance. They were once maybe an employee who was really engaged, but now they appear to be much more withdrawn and their productivity has increased. Maybe there's new or increased violations of policies and procedures. They're displaying some disorientation. Maybe they appear to be confused. Someone who was once really happy, jovial, and chatty is now very solemn, tearful, and quiet. Maybe there's increased irritability, personality changes, instability that might lead to outbursts. Or maybe there's bizarre statements that are being observed in writing or in conversation. Maybe it indicates a level of paranoia, or it's a document that just doesn't make any sense. Persistently contacting you. So particularly if this is unwanted, obsessive, inappropriate, maybe even via personal means. Unexplained injuries. So these are injuries that are not on the bony prominences. This is where those red flags are going to be. Injuries that are more on the fleshy parts of the body, the cheeks, the arms, things like that, versus the shin, the elbows, the palm of the hands that we tend to maybe bruise up if we have a stumble or if we bump into furniture. They also might be in various different stages of healing. Maybe there's pattern marks like fingerprints, handprints, things like that. Those would be concerning. Increased absenteeism or tardiness. Someone who self-reports mental health concerns or violence. Just because someone has a mental health condition does not mean that they're going to engage in violent behavior. When someone discloses that information to you, it could be an indicator to see how they're doing. Are they connected with supports? Do they know about the faculty and staff assistance program? Someone who is suspected to be using drugs or abusing alcohol. Maybe they're coming to work smelling like alcohol, appearing under the influence, their speech is slurred, their gait is unsteady, will not leave your office, particularly after being asked, referencing thoughts of violence towards self or others. So again, this could be increased talk about weapons, violent crimes, maybe they're praising or identifying with those who commit violent acts, or maybe they're making suicidal or homicidal statements. Again, I want to reiterate that just because you see some of these signs does not mean that someone is going to be violent. It may mean that they need some resources and support. However, it is important to be aware of, and if something feels concerning or is not sitting right with you in your gut, the biggest thing that you can do is report it. Do it in a discreet manner, not standing, at the copy machine going, man, Sarah, she is nuts, but in a professional and ethical manner. And later in this presentation, we will talk more about sharing your concerns. So let's take a look at some common stressors or things that could be triggering events. What I think is important to note is that what might be common stressors that you deal with in your department or in your personal life may be very different from somebody else. So as we go through this slide and look at this list, which is certainly not all inclusive, though some of these things may not be significant stressors for you, for me, or for other individuals, other folks may have more difficulty adjusting to these changes or stressors. What we have here, occupational or academic problems, financial problems. And financial problems are the most common trend in domestic violence cases. Marital or relationship difficulties, changes in life circumstances. My goodness, think of all of those that many of us have faced with, within these past few years. And changes in life circumstances could also be, stressors that folks don't think about. Think about having a baby, having a new life come into the family, things like that. Illness, death of a family member or friend. Other things that we may not think about that could be particularly distressing to another person might be the death of a pet. For many people, their pet is their family member or their, one of their lines of support. The media in general, feelings of what happens maybe politically, and sometimes people don't always agree with each other. And at times, those things can relate to a safety perspective. So if you see someone is struggling, we would encourage you to submit a referral or call our office to talk it through. Okay, so we're going to move into talking about strategies and really focusing in on de-escalation techniques. The first thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that every situation is different. So as we talk about de-escalation techniques, we're going to be exploring strategies that you might use when a person is escalated or hits a state of crisis. A crisis is any situation in which a person's ability to cope is exceeded. What might be a crisis for you or for me may not be one for another person and vice versa. But at that moment, the person experiencing or in crisis is feeling as if they are stuck in that situation and or completely out of control. So we're going to talk about de-escalation strategies. And what I've done here is break them down into categories of what some of these strategies may achieve to help de-escalate a situation, help an individual gain a sense of control, those type of things. Starting out, when faced with a situation involving a hostile person or a person who is quote unquote on the edge, and there is the potential for violence, but no violence has happened as of yet, ask yourself, can I diffuse this situation safely? If yes, proceed. If no, or if you have any concerns surrounding safety, call 911. So starting out with our first category, working to create safety. And this is safety certainly for that person, but also for yourself and others around you. Some strategies here that might help to achieve this are to start out by appearing calm, centered, and self-assured. Even if you're not feeling that way, if you can try to present that, keeping in mind that people often take their behavioral cues from others. And so keeping your cool can go a long way in helping others regain theirs. Being present, asking uninvolved parties to leave the area if this can be done safely. It's not going to be helpful, when there's a person in crisis who is feeling completely overwhelmed and out of control and unsafe, to have a crowd of people around them maybe making comments that aren't helping, maybe pulling out their cell phones and video recording. So asking uninvolved parties to leave the area. If that can't be done, providing a safe space for that person, taking that person to a more discreet, safe, private location, if that can be done safely. You might also consider taking one other person with you. Coming up with ways to alert others and maybe doing so in a way that's safe and can be discreet. So thinking about code words, and we'll talk about some examples of that later in this presentation. Positioning yourself for safety and avoiding challenging body language. If you can do so, try standing at an angle from that person and not directly in front of them. This can feel less challenging. It can also give space for that person to retreat if they need to. It also does not put you in their direct line of fire should they become physically aggressive. It gives you more room to move out of the way versus standing in their direct line. Do not touch a person without permission. Minimize body movements. Allow ventilation. Ask for questions that cause for long narratives. And reassure them that you're there to help and support them and that you want to keep them safe. Ways to help that person maintain their dignity. Don't embarrass, acknowledge the person's feelings, Listen empathetically and non-judgmentally. Try not to take things personally. Recognize that everyone has their bad days and that this is not about you. Don't attempt to argue. Even if the person is wrong, they are acting on perceptions that are very real to them in that moment. Don't agree with, encourage, or argue with distortions, delusions, or hallucinations. You can respond without agreeing. You can, maybe acknowledge the emotions, making comments like, that must be horrible for you, or I can see that you're really upset. Don't downplay the seriousness of the situation. Don't make promises that you cannot keep. And one of those, the big ones that we tend to see within our office are individuals making promises to keep something confidential. That is not a promise that you may be able to keep, particularly if it pertains to safety. And should you have to break that promise, it could damage rapport. It could also escalate matters. So keep that in mind. Adopt an attitude of acceptance and seek to understand. Now, keeping in mind that acceptance is respecting the person's feelings, values, experiences as valid, even if they differ from yours. And then look at refocusing by making transition from dealing with the emotions to dealing with the problem. Breaking the rhythm. Breaking the rhythm can help reduce the momentum of the situation. It can help you even avoid getting caught up in the chaos of the situation. So what we're looking at doing is slowing things down. And we can do this in a variety of different ways. Offering water. This would be recommended to do in a paper cup versus a ceramic mug, or something that could be damaging or harmful if it becomes a projectile. Speak slowly, clearly, and softly. Ask questions to regain control of the conversation. You might write down their concerns. Allow for breaks. Allow for the person to, step out and grab some water. Ways that this can be done can be by saying, what we've talked for a long time. Why don't we take a break, get some water, use the restroom, and let's regroup. There's a clock here on this picture, and I think this is important as a reminder that time is on your side. Listen and allow for airing of the grievance without judgment or comment. Be present. Show a presence of this is their time and you are willing to respect that. It's important for the person in crisis or who's angry to see that you're seeking to understand the situation and how they're feeling about that situation. It's also important to consider limit setting and boundaries. Boundaries and limit setting are very appropriate at particular times. Some examples can be asking a belligerent person to leave the area and come back when they're calmer, naming their behavior, establishing ground rules, describing consequences of any violent behavior. So let's talk about some examples. If you have a meeting that is coming up and it's with an individual who has had a history of, maybe getting angry, using profane language, yelling, making threatening remarks, maybe at the start of that meeting, you set some limits, starting out by saying something along the lines of, I'm really glad that you're here to have this conversation. It's important that I hear all of your concerns. It's important that we have this conversation. However, if at any point in this conversation, emotions seem to be getting high to the point of yelling or profane language or threats, I'm going to end this meeting and look at regrouping at another time. This could be an example of that. If you're in the midst of a meeting that then becomes escalated or there's some hostility, that could be a time where you say, it seems that emotions are getting high. Why don't we take a break? How about you go and get some air for 5 minutes and then we can regroup. If threats are being made, it's okay to acknowledge that, to say that comment felt threatening to me, or I felt unsafe about that. If threats continue, I'm going to end this meeting. Or if threats continue, I will be calling police. So again, naming the behavior, establishing some ground rules, letting them know what the consequences would be. Okay, so kind of bringing some of this together, looking at ways of enhancing communication. Here's a chart that kind of outlines communication blockers and enhancers. So ways of enhancing communication, asking for more information versus shutting down communication with blaming or attacking language. Making eye contact, leaning forward, giving your full attention. If you're sitting at the desk, turning your computer off, maybe turning your ringer off of your cell phone so that there's nothing that is distracting or drawing your attention away from the conversation. Showing empathy and validation, being patient and silent. Now, silence can go a long way in a wide variety of things. Silence can be helpful in that some people are just uncomfortable with it, maybe yourself. And taking 10 seconds to give that person space, maybe if that person is uncomfortable with that silence, they'll fill it. And they'll fill it by giving more information, by airing out more of their concerns. Silence also gives an individual, who may be experiencing crisis or who may be in distress, the space to allow the opportunity for them to think about what it is that's going on in their mind and to be able to articulate those things. Withholding judgment and asking again open-ended question versus those closed-ended questions. So some key takeaways, self-awareness. So again, being mindful of your voice, your body language. Does it appear open and engaging? Is your voice low and calm? But also being aware of what is your mindset? What might be some of your unconscious biases? What are you bringing with you to this situation to de-escalate it? Remember that each situation is different. Take any threat seriously. Use your resources. You don't have to have all of the answers. So take time and reach out to your resources and support. So, as we know, as we've heard about, safety is everyone's responsibility. So it is important to be committed to acting when a concern about safety arises. So let's look at how we can act. Most importantly, sharing your concerns. Per the regulation, all employees have the responsibility to immediately report any violent behavior or threats of violence. You can report your concerns to your immediate supervisor, a representative from the Violence Prevention and Threat Management Office, an employee relations staff if the concern involves an employee, university police, or the Office of Student Conduct if the concern involves a student. If you go to our website, you will find on every page this red Share Concerns button on the right sidebar. If you click on this button, it will take you to our referral form. Completing that form and submitting it will then go to our office and we will be able to assess and respond as appropriate. Our department is not available after hours. If a welfare check is needed or if there is an immediate safety concern, calling 911 would be the necessary next step. So let's take a look at some numbers here. From 2020 to 2021, we received a total of 1,628 referrals that you all submitted. 491 of those referrals were new cases that were assigned to our behavior assessment team. This includes 208 referrals on students, 93 referrals involving employees, and 190 referrals that involve non-affiliated individuals. And a non-affiliated individual is someone who does not have a direct connection to the university. So most commonly we see these with our interpersonal violence cases. So the non-affiliated individual may be a partner, spouse, whatever, to an employee. Other non-affiliated cases involved current or former employees and students. Keep in mind that sometimes we receive multiple reports from different data sources that may involve different data points. So for example, we may receive a referral on an employee that comes in from a colleague. Another referral may come in for that same concern of that same employee from employee relations and maybe management. All right, so you may be wondering, if I were to make a referral, what information should I be sharing? What should I include? Well, we want you to tell us everything that you know. Even if it's third or fourth hand information, it is all important and relevant to us. It helps us get a better picture of who we are working with and what types of interventions may be helpful. So we don't want you to tell us what you think we want to hear. Tell us as much as you know. We are looking for trends, strengths, triggers, signs of escalation, or other details that will help us decide on how we conduct our follow-up and informs our next steps in intervention. So the nature of the incident, what is the concern? Who's involved? Any victim information, witnesses, your observations. So what led you to sharing your concerns? Any known history, as we talked about, all known information is essential to us. How does the individual respond to authority or limit setting? Are other offices connected, such as student conduct, employer relations, the Office of Institutional Equity and Diversity? This helps us to know who else we might reach out to for additional information that may inform our assessment. Again, as we talked about before, you cannot provide 100% confidentiality. You can make an anonymous report if you so choose. The challenge is that you may not provide all of the information that we need to determine if additional follow-up is needed. So we would recommend that you share with us your name and a way to contact you. A concerning behavior report does not mean that someone is going to get in trouble. Our process is not disciplinary in nature. It is designed to provide early intervention when someone is experiencing some challenges and provide supports and resources that can help them be at their most successful, in addition to ensuring the safety of our campus community. The earlier that we can address a concern and provide support, the more likely we will be successful. You may see a behavior way before it gets to us, so please report early and often. So you've heard me mention the behavior assessment team, the CARES team. So I want to talk about these two teams. So at NC State, we have two teams with one goal of ensuring safety of our students in the community. When we receive a referral, the risk assessment case manager reviews each new incident that comes in, and based on the information, we'll either assign it for follow-up by a member of the behavior assessment team, or what we like to refer to as BAT, or by a member of the CARES team. A case manager will be assigned the case and may reach out to the reporter for more information and to strategize on next steps. So looking at both of these teams, there are some similarities. Both teams are multidisciplinary teams. Both incorporate case management and collateral information data, and both are not disciplinary processes. Differences. One of the main differences is in team structure. We will explore more as it relates to the behavior assessment team and who the representatives are on that team. CARES focuses solely on concerns involving students, whereas the behavior assessment team focuses on concerns that involve students, employees, and non-affiliated individuals. CARES addresses concerns related to students in distress. So this could be students who are are suicidal without other risk factors, students in distress, having academic issues, housing concerns, adjustment issues, chronic mental health crisis, substance use issues. Maybe they're missing classes or they're non-responsive and to their faculty, to other folks, and people just don't know where they are, what's going on. They're displaying disruptive classroom behavior where violence and potential danger is not noted. Maybe they're survivor of a sexual assault. Whereas the behavior assessment team focuses on concerns related to potentially violent behavior. The assessment and case management processes are also different. The behavior assessment team uses particular tools designed by threat assessment professionals that have been well validated in the field to help inform how we conduct our threat assessments, but also the strategies we may put in place as a response mechanism. So looking at team structure as it relates to the behavior assessment team. So again, this is a multidisciplinary team. Our team includes representatives from the following offices: University Police, the Office of Student Conduct, Prevention Services, Academic Affairs, Housing, the Counseling Center, Employee Relations, the Office of General Counsel, the Office of Institutional Equity and Diversity, Violence Prevention and Threat Management Case Managers. The chair of our team is the Risk Assessment Case Manager, the Associate Vice Chancellor of Environmental Health and Public Safety, and others included as needed for specific cases. And as we look at a standard of care expectations, NC State's behavior assessment team is meeting it by ensuring that team members have knowledge of current literature by known experts, that they have regular training, and that there is consistent implementation of our practices. So again, report early and often. Some departments, colleges want to handle concerns in-house. One of the issues that this can lead to is silos, and this can end up being a disservice to the student or employee, but it can also lead to situations being addressed in a way that can lead to escalation. So not only are you required to report under the campus workplace violence regulation, but it's imperative to share concerns early on so we can assist our students and employees in being successful. Don't focus on whether a situation is a CARES concern or behavior assessment team. Focus on the fact of sharing concerns with those that may be able to connect with individual offices that could assist in addressing whatever the concerns are. The earlier we can address a problem and provide support, the more likely we are to be successful. And again, you may see a behavior way before it gets to us. Okay, so let's just talk about some general safety recommendations. Starting out with reporting an emergency. So in doing so, you all probably know that you would dial 911 and state that this is an emergency. Information that is needed and helpful and that you are likely to be asked is location. So from my perspective, location is the most critical piece of information that you can get out from the start, because if for any reason you are to get disconnected, first responders know where they need to be going to. So the location of where the emergency is, what is happening, your name, a phone number from where you were calling so that if they need to contact you back, they can do so. Are there weapons involved? Is anybody hurt? Who's responsible or doing the concerning thing? A description of them. What are they wearing? Where are they? If they left, what direction of travel did they leave in? And did they get into a vehicle? So as much information as you can offer up to help first responders in their initial response. Other best practice recommendations. Staff should wear their badges at all times. That way they can always be identified as staff. When someone checks in, obtain their name and information on who they're seeing. Ensure that they are greeted and escorted at the end of the appointment and back to the reception area. If possible, main offices should be behind secured door. We also recognize that many of these recommendations are not realistic for many people. All staff should greet guests again and escort in and out of secured areas. And no appointments should take place after duty hours. If appointments are made before or after duty hours, a safety plan should be discussed, making sure that another individual is present and that there is a plan moving forward. So for example, in our office, we have it as we have it developed and already discussed that should somebody be in a meeting that goes to the end of the day, that there is another person present. And one way to help wrap that meeting up would be to knock on the door and do kind of a check-in. Should there be a meeting that is going on at any point in the day, we make sure that there's another individual present. And should someone hear concerning noises, yelling, other things coming from one of our offices, then that person would go and knock on the door and just check in. Other best practice recommendations: do not release personal information regarding your staff. Now, this can be a tricky one. So an example to think about would be, let's say someone calls in and you pick up the phone and this person claims to be the spouse or a family member of your coworker. And your coworker's birthday is coming up and they want to send them flowers or something like that. And they're calling asking for their work address or their office location. Keep in mind, one, you may not know and have no ability to confirm who is on the other end of that phone call. And two, you may not have all of the information about what's going on in your coworker's personal life and the possibility that this person may not be a safe person to have this information. Communicate with coworkers, making sure that everybody is on page with any safety measures, things like that. For example, if someone has been trespassed from your office space and should not be coming in, make sure that your colleagues are well aware of that. Engaging in situational drills and exercises, knowing where your duress button is if you have one, setting up code system. It's also important to practice your plans. Make sure that this also includes not only evacuation procedures, but a method for employees to assemble or report in so that it can be determined who is safe and who may still be at risk or missing. Plans should also include provisions for employees who have a disability. For example, an employee who uses a wheelchair or who has a visual impairment or a hearing impairment. This is an example of a code system. You may be familiar with this when you go into places like hospitals, where you'll hear, things come over the intercom like code red, code blue. This code color system has a meaning for something different, and you can create it to how it fits best for your office space. So blue could mean a medical emergency. Code orange could be that there is a security or crisis incident with no weapon. Red, weapon present. Black, bomb threat. Other considerations: being aware of your surroundings, setting up your workplace environment in a way that optimizes your awareness. So ways that optimize your visibility, maybe positioning your desk where you can see out your door so you can see who's coming in and out of your office, who's coming up and down the hallway. Thinking about alarm signals, emergency phones, control of access, arranging your space so that employees aren't trapped in small enclosures, being aware of where your exits are, and adequately and clearly marking escape routes. Listen to your instincts and report early and often. As we wrap up, and before I jump into running through some resources for consideration, just take a look at all of the things we've been faced with over time, particularly within these past few years with the pandemic, civil unrest, unemployment rates, waves of the coronavirus, lots of surprises and uncertainty during this time that create sources of stress, sudden losses, worries and fears that can amplify pre-existing emotional and mental health issues. Um, Work that might have been an escape from an abusive or dysfunctional home, the ripple effect of needs for child or elder care, and the list goes on and on. So I leave you with this image and this phrase of or thought of being in the same storm but in a different boat. So author Damien Barr had presented in this I don't know if it's necessarily a statement, but just this write-up where he talked about we are in the same storm, but on very different boats. So with all the things that are going on and with things that go on in our lives, some of us may be riding on this aircraft carrier where the waves are just kind of knocking into us, but it's not really disrupting us too much. Others are maybe paddling their hearts out on a canoe or life raft. So keeping this in mind, I think it's important to remember that we look out for one another. And should we identify any concerns, to reach out, even if it's to reach out to our office and just have a conversation, talk through your concerns. We certainly would encourage that, as there are many resources and supports available for individuals. So diving further into that, this is a list of some of the resources here at NC State. Of course, we have our office with the Department of Risk Assessment, University Police, the Counseling Center and Prevention Services, the Office of Student Conduct for students, Employee Relations for employees, and the Faculty and Staff Assistance Program, which you might hear referred to as FASAP, again for employees. We also have the Office for Institutional Equity and Diversity, the Student Ombuds Program, and the Faculty and Staff Ombuds Program. So the Faculty and Staff Assistance Program, this is a resource for employees. FASAP has so many things. We're going to talk about the support area, but FASAP also provides resources for legal information. If you are planning a family reunion or a big celebration, maybe a wedding or something, you can reach out to FASAP for vendor information. And they'll send you a list of vendors that are, within the area or for what you're looking with. Just a lot of great resources. But one of the things that they have pertains to mental health and well-being. And FASAP offers 3 free confidential sessions for employees and their families. And this is per concern. So, for example, let's say we have one employee who is just dealing with some general work stress or other kind of life stressors that they want to talk about. They can get 3 free confidential sessions for that issue. Let's say down the road there is a loss that they experience and they want some grief support. They can have 3 free confidential sessions for that separate issue. Should the 3 free sessions not be enough and an individual wants more, FASAP will help work to connect to ongoing support. They also provide management consultation and referrals and crisis incident stress management and debriefings, and again, so much more. Training opportunities through our department. So we have the workplace violence prevention training, which you all are taking. It will be offered again in the future, live, either online or in person. There's also one specifically for managers and leaders that is offered continuously online. Managers and leaders are required by the regulation to complete this training biannually. Our office also provides a suicide prevention training based on the QPR model, a bullying prevention training, threat assessment 101, child abuse identification and reporting. And there are required trainings such as this one under the minors regulation for anyone that may be working with minors on campus through university sponsored programs. We also have Telling Amy's Story, which is based off of a real life incident of domestic violence in the workplace that occurred in Pennsylvania, and so much more. You can reach out to our department to even tailor trainings for your specific department if interested. We've had departments reach out to us where we have done a dealing with difficult people training, or a co-training with university police, where university police will do an active shooter component and we will do a workplace violence prevention component. So if you have any questions, any interest, please reach out to our department. If you go on our website, you will find a link for a form to make a training request. Should you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our department, either by email or phone, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Take care and be safe.